GetUp, a Labor-linked activist group, this week wrote to 150 food businesses threatening a boycott if they didn't agree that man was warming the planet. It also warned them to resign from the Food and Grocery Council, which is campaigning against the government's carbon dioxide tax. Joining me is Gerard Henderson, head of the Sydney Institute and the country's sharpest media watcher. Gerard, GetUp claims to have 570,000 odd members, and it seems to be arguing not with reason, but with threats.
Yes, well, if GetUp was talking about a political issue, I suppose it's entitled to do so, but what it's telling people is what they should do in relation to buying groceries or other food items. It's an example of the left's intolerance. There's a concept among sections of the left and other ideological groups, but we're talking at the moment about the left, that there's a concept that error has no rights, that if you are deemed to be in error on climate change, then you really have no right to speak, or you have no right to sell groceries, or you have no right to sell petrol, or in a sense you have no rights at all. It's this kind of very intolerant tone that you find in ideological organisations like GetUp in Australia and similar bodies overseas.
It scares me a bit. There seems to be a deliberate attempt to close down debate, particularly on global warming. Now, GetUp is just one of a number of examples I could cite, but for example, GetUp is in part behind the boycotting or the closing down of venues where Christopher Monckton, another sceptic touring Australia, was scheduled to appear, like the Brisbane Broncos Club. This is starting to worry me.
Well, there's a tradition of this, sadly. If you go back to the late 1960s and early 1970s, there were left-wing groups on campuses that refused to allow people to speak and shut down functions. And this has kept going, but it's probably enhanced in activity in recent times. But it's an extension of the concept that error has no rights, that if you have something that left-wing groups don't want to hear, then you shouldn't say it, and if someone wants to host you, then they shouldn't host you, and if someone wants to fund you, then they shouldn't fund you. And it's an attempt to close down debate. It usually doesn't work, but it's not something that's unusual. We're just seeing greater manifestations of it at the moment because of the climate change debate. And
it's true that the government's also not participating in debates with sceptics.
Well, I can understand why government ministers decide that they don't want to turn up at functions. I mean, I can understand that. I think that's true of other governments too, that you don't necessarily want to debate your critics, but that it's another issue that other people don't want to debate. Because if you're in the public debate, then you have a right to debate with everyone, and you should debate with everyone. And what you're finding here is that people who hold a certain view on climate change won't debate with sceptics, and therefore that effectively closed down the debate, Gerard, as well.
That is absolutely true, and people like Tim Flannery should get out more, I think. Look, thank you very much for joining us, Gerard Henderson in Sydney. I remember my disgust at first seeing pictures like this of Nazis boycotting Jewish shops in Germany. I never dreamed I'd see one day protesters boycotting Jewish shops in Australia. But last month they did, protesting at a Max Brenner chocolate shop in Sydney, and then again last weekend at a Max Brenner shop in Melbourne. The reason? The franchise's parent group is an Israeli company which supports its army. If the protesters were really worried about an army oppressing Muslims, why don't they protest against the Syrian army that's murdering democracy protesters by the day? While protesters picket only Jewish shops, I'm calling shame. 1 month ago, Liberal Senator David Bushby meowed at Penny Wong.
If I can finish now.
Bushby apologised, but Labor went to town, smearing Liberal leader Tony Abbott as a sexist. Take Minister Tanya Plibersek.
Whenever there is conflict, we have the Leader of the Opposition and his senior ministers and reverting to this sort of sexist language.
But this week, Labor whip Joel Fitzgibbon meowed at Liberal Deputy Leader Julie Bishop. Fitzgibbon said sorry, kind of.
I believe there were a number of interventions from this part of the House during that provocative speech from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, and I do a catch-all apology for any that I may have made.
But where was Plibersek this time? Why didn't she smear Labor's leaders as sexist? Hypocrite. But what phony outrage all around. The Afghan parliament this week showed what a real insult looks like. Meow. Protest theatre has never worked for me, not from the first days of those anti-nuclear rallies. They seemed either too silly to take seriously or just so attention-seeking and self-obsessed that you can't work out the point. Perfect example this week in the protest theatre outside Julia Gillard's office. Does watching this woman demonstrating against the live cattle trade make you take her cause more seriously or less? And who had to mop up all that mess? Someone should protest. And that's the show. I'll be back at 4:30 for a special analysis of the government's tax. Meet the Press is next with Paul Bongiorno. Goodbye.